There are many sports that can be enjoyed while diving: photography, spearfishing, exploration and observation, and collecting tropical species are just a few. Lobster fishing must be near the top of the list, as the incredible popularity of the sporting season attests. Seeing a rocky outcrop with multiple pairs of antennae protruding, or catching a glimpse of a giant almost hidden in the dark depths of a rocky niche, always brings a quick pulse and a special rush of excitement. Underwater sounds also accompany the sport. These creatures squeak in protest when a hand grasps their shell, and often flap their tails vigorously when placed in a bag. Florida lobsters, or spiny crayfish, whatever you prefer to call them, are abundant in the waters around our state. Commercial lobstermen catch them in traps or cages, but Florida sport fishermen will catch them by hand without the aid of spears or hooks. Traps may be used. They consist of a loop that can be tightened at the end of a handle. The loop is placed behind the lobster and wrapped around the tail and tightened by hand or some spring-loaded device. Nets are also permitted. The mouth of the net is placed at one end of a ledge or opening in the reef, and the lobster is gently guided into it with a sculling stick. The traditional and perhaps most common method is to use the sculling stick to block the lobster's escape route and grab it with a gloved hand. Catching one this way is a special achievement and as exciting as the grilled tail itself. In any group of lobster divers, there always seems to be one who consistently succeeds in catching more and larger crayfish than the others. I asked a number of such divers for some useful tips for other sportsmen, from beginners to seasoned lobstermen, and compiled the following 10 tips from the ideas they shared. Perhaps unsurprisingly, despite being interviewed separately, their suggestions were very similar. Part of covering more territory for lobsters involves not being distracted by other things, and one of the divers I asked said to leave the speargun behind and collect the gear at the dock. I had similar thoughts and tried it years ago, but I personally gave up because it seemed like every time I didn't have a spear or net, I would catch something unusual and regret it. Now I dive for lobsters with all sorts of other gear. By not spending time and energy catching small lobsters, you can spend more time diving to find and catch lobsters of good size. Lobster eyes are compound and don't have accurate visual perception, but they do pick up movement easily, and this can spook the bug. They can also react quickly. Place your hand near the edge of the crayfish's eye socket and gently push the crustacean towards it by placing the tickling stick on the opposite side and behind it. Use gentle pressure to push the creature towards your hand or net so that it slowly retreats, and then close your hand firmly around its shell. Before catching, contact with the lobster's antennae can spook it. However, small movements of your head can distract it enough to keep its antennae pointed away from your steady hand. Sometimes lobsters, especially large ones, immediately retreat back into the depths of the ledges and cannot be herded towards the edge. Once blocked from retreating with the tickling stick, they must be grabbed from the front. Pulling on the antennae will likely break them, so as you reach for them, continue running your hand along the antennae all the way to the base of the horn. The spines on the antennae point forward, so the glove may get stuck as your hand moves towards the head, requiring a loose grip. Be able to grip the base of the antennae firmly without fear of breaking and remove the lobster. Lobsters often get stuck in the opening so hard that no amount of force is enough to pull him out. Shaking the base of the antennae will somehow disorient the lobster and cause it to loosen its grip. The same is true if the lobster is struggling to get out after exiting the cave. Shaking the base of the antennae often overpowers the lobster and makes it easier to bag the lobster. Decide which side of the opening is best for catching. Look for the back entrance and exit and the deep cave. Decide how best to get each lobster out of the deep holes and to the side you have chosen. A high percentage of solitary lobsters are egg-laying females. A close look at the orange egg mass will not only save you the time of catching and releasing the lobster, but will will also save the female and her eggs from unnecessary stress and injury. Lobstermen can be men or women, or boys or girls. You must have a special lobster fishing license. Some lobstermen catch lobsters for fun, but many men and women catch and sell lobsters as a job. You need to learn how to catch them from someone else who catches lobsters, and you must have that special license. While American lobsters can be found as far south as Virginia and the Carolinas, the most viable commercial fishery actually starts in the Massachusetts, Rhode Island area, and stretches all the way to Newfoundland, Canada. Much of the lobster fishing is still done the same way it was when the fishery first started, with a little modern technology to make things easier. About 80 to 90% of the catch is from inshore fisheries, and lobsters are caught in traps or baited pots. The number of traps a lobsterman is allowed to catch at any given time can vary depending on the regulations of the place he or she is fishing. However, the technique is essentially the same. The lobsterman will place a bag full of bait, usually herring or other fish, into each trap dropped from the boat, or set. It is tied with a rope, trap line, to a buoy to mark its location. The buoy is painted with specific colors registered by each lobsterman, which helps identify the owner of each trap. Each trap is allowed to soak or stay in the water for usually 2 or 3 days. The lobster boat then returns to pull each trap up. The lobsterman will pull the boat up alongside the trap and hook the buoy with a hook, a special hook designed for that purpose. The trap line is then brought onto the boat and connected to a hydraulic trap puller, a pulley-like system that automatically pulls the trap up from the bottom to the side of the boat. Once on board, the lobsterman and/or boatman will remove the lobsters from the trap. The lobsters that are the right size are kept, and those that are too small or too large, and those with V-notches, are released back into the water. A new bag of bait is placed in the trap and the process is reset for the next catch. Lobsters are caught in lobster traps, also known as lobster cages. The lobsterman will place a bag full of bait, usually herring or other fish, in each trap. He or she will then go out to sea on a lobster boat and drop the traps into the water, hoping that the lobsters will enter the traps because they want to eat the bait. Once a lobster is in the trap, it is difficult for it to escape. After a day or two, the lobsterman will drag the traps they set into the water and hope to see the lobsters inside. Sometimes the lobsters have to be released back into the ocean. Most of the time, lobstermen release the mother lobsters back into the ocean by making a special, V-shaped notch in their tail fins. Also, smaller, younger lobsters, in Maine, those with a carapace length of less than 3 1/4, are released back. Sometimes, they also release very large lobsters back, in Maine, those with a carapace length of more than 5. They do this to ensure that there will always be enough lobsters in the ocean for fishermen to catch and people to eat. This is called conservation. Almost all of our quality catch comes from the cold waters of the Gulf of Maine in the Atlantic Ocean. Lobsters primarily live in shallow water, and as they grow, they move into deeper water. We catch most of our new shell lobsters within a dam radius of our Spruce Head Island facility, the most prolific lobster fishery in the state of Maine. Warm water lobsters are spiny lobsters or lobsters found in Florida, the Caribbean and Southern California. True lobsters or North American lobsters can be found in the colder waters of the North Atlantic. The unique fact is that true lobsters are full of meat while spiny lobsters are not. Meat can only be obtained from spiny lobsters. A lobster must molt in order to grow. This process is called molting. It takes about 20 moltings over 5 to 7 years for a lobster to become an adult. Before the old shell is shed, a new, paper-thin shell is formed underneath the old shell. When the old shell is shed, the lobster is called a new shell. Some people like to eat new shell lobsters because the meat is soft, sweet and easy to eat. You don't need any tools to analyze them. New shell lobsters are usually harvested from July to October. Except for minor physiological differences, male and female lobsters are very similar. Female lobsters can sometimes have roe eggs in their bodies, which turn bright red when cooked. Restaurant chefs sometimes ask us to provide female lobsters to use the eggs in their presentation. Blue lobsters are poisonous because the pigment in their shells is genetically immune. Most lobsters are greenish-brown, but we've seen blue, bright red, which is almost the same color when cooked, and even partially white lobsters. Like all arthropods, the lobster's nervous system is very primitive and contains far fewer neurons than ours. The neurons are grouped into clusters called neurons. Furthermore, lobsters lack a cerebral cortex, the area of the human brain that senses pain. Lobsters have special gills that allow them to survive out of water. If kept cool and eaten, lobsters can survive out of water for up to a week, but we don't recommend eating them. Fishing for lobsters in the wild is difficult for two reasons. First, they are generally nocturnal creatures. This means that if you are spearfishing during the day, you will need to scout and find their hiding places. Second, they will not go down without a fight. Lobsters can be very difficult to dislodge from the caves and crevices they like to hide in. You have to grasp the lobster with your hands and then pull them out of their hiding places.